All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back into GC Live. I am Wes Mitchell. He is Chris Clark. Missed you guys. Hope you've been doing well. Plenty to get to. Gamecock football and Gamecock recruiting never sleeps. South Carolina with a junior day this past weekend. We're going to get to that. Spring practice already right around the corner, believe it or not. For the most part, the roster is together. Transfer portal over, closed, all that. So plenty for us to get to. But first, let me tell you about our friend Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Like we always tell you, if you're in the market for a new home, just hit up our guy Clint. He's going to help walk you through the entire process of getting a mortgage there at CMG Home Loans. Again, that phone number, 803-422-6797. Where do we begin, Chris? I'll tell you where I want to begin. I want to start with Nicholas Harbor and the news as of late that, and we'll see exactly what this looks like, right? But as of right now, what we know for a fact is that Nick wants to be able to put more time into football, and that Nick is not doing the indoor track season, which is actually going on right now. Outdoor track season is later on in the spring. We'll see exactly what that looks like. Beamer did not completely confirm that Harbor will not be participating in outdoor track. So that's the big picture here. What we do know, there's going to be a lot more football time on deck for Harbor this year compared to last year. And I think that's massive for him, man.
Yeah, I agree. Nick was around some last spring practice when he could be, when he wasn't in track practice, when he wasn't running events, whatever it took for track, because he was engaged. He wasn't trying to do both, bouncing back and forth between practices. He was engaged when he could be for football, but that was really, hey, he's in the building when he can be. He's hitting a meeting here and there. But Wes, the mental reps aspect for a player who, was going into year two, and not just going into year two, but a player that, as we've documented, was not a guy that came in as a fully developed wide receiver. This is a wide receiver who is still very much learning to play the receiver position. And as he mentioned to you recently, in your interview with him on the Gamecock Club Hour, that did, compared to other guys who had that opportunity to go through a full slate of spring practice, they do get ahead of you in terms of what, the reps, the physical reps, the mental reps, the time around the program, time on the field, time with the coaches. And so you could see Nick Harbor's development and progression throughout his second season. Part of that, I think, was, just year one to year two jump. But you could see from game 1 to game 12, just the comfort level that Nick Harbor had. He made a lot of plays throughout the course of the year, and it wasn't just a flash here and there. It wasn't just run a go route. We saw that, right? We saw that, in several instances. But he looked like a guy who was kind of showing more glimpses, and the glimpses that he did show, I think, looked like a guy who is developing into a more complete receiver. And so there's still plenty of potential to tap into with Nick Harbor. The more time that he can spend around the program, the better. If this was a guy that was a senior who had grown up playing receiver his whole career, you go, okay, maybe he can balance two sports and it'll be fine. But for him, I think every single practice, every bit of football development is critical for him. And so it seems to me, Wes, and he said as much to you, I think, maybe in different words, for him to take the next step as a player, him having more reps, more time around the football program, this is a big move in order to accomplish that.
Yeah, it is. And I think, Nick is a sharp kid, man, and he's one of those guys that puts no limitations on himself. Like, he has very, very high hopes for himself and a very high standard. And I do think, just kind of looking around and seeing some of these other guys get that head start last year, he took notice. But I also think and I'm not saying he didn't love football before, maybe he did, but I think he certainly loved football and the way he was able to play during the final half of this season. Like, you could tell he kind of caught the bug, so to speak, of wanting to be able to take what he was doing and take it to the next level. And he wants to play in the NFL, whether that is after this coming season or whether that is after the season after. That is a goal of his. That is something he can taste. And I think he kind of already is starting to feel you look at Father Time, like, he's been here 2 years. He's looking and saying, well, I got 2 years left. And he's not a COVID guy, not a red shirt, not, there's no extra years of eligibility as far as we know right now. I suppose if this 5-year window thing kicks in, maybe there would be, but I don't think that's remotely in his thought process right now. His thought process is 2 years down. Let me see if I can make a big step forward. And, even talk to me some about trying to be more of a leader with all the young guys that are coming in. Credited, the guys like Spencer Rattler, the guys like Xavier Leggett for what they were able to do to help him as a true freshman. Said at the time he didn't even know how much they helped him until he kind of looks back on what he learned from them. And so I think he just saw, hey, I can be a wide receiver one. I can be that guy, but it's going to take a big step forward. It's going to take a big time commitment. And I think that's kind of a scary sight, man, for defenses. If Harbor can start to tap into a good bit of what we saw this past season and be a threat all over the field, the intricacies of playing wide receiver, it doesn't just mean, am I big, fast, and can catch the football? We get caught up in that way too much, like way too much. What do we, in recruiting, what do we always talk about? Wait, how fast is that guy? How big is he? That's the first thing we talk about when we're talking about receivers. It's way more than that. And as Charles Power will tell you, there are 100 different ways you can be successful at wide receiver. You can be 5'9" and too quick for anybody to cover you. You can be 6'7" and too tall for anybody to cover you. You can be Alshon Jeffrey, where you look like you're not even moving that fast, but you're just always open because you have the best ball skills I've ever seen. So there's 100 different ways to play receiver successfully. And I'm pretty curious to see what that looks like for Nick Harbor with another year of development.
Yeah, nobody ever catches Alshon when he gets the ball. I mean, he did. He looked like he was not moving, but he was. Remember Alshon's high school tape? You're like, I think that pixel looks good. Like, this kid looks good. But then, I mean, he was something else, man. But yeah, Nick, like, freshman year, Nick, like, he would show the glimpses. You remember the Florida game? Like, he has that great catch. I think he had another one in the Missouri game. And you're like, wow, And then you could just, I mean, you really can. You can go back and kind of just watch the games, watch his progression throughout to where, like, I think, Wes, there was a stretch this year. What was it? Maybe the Vandy game. And Nick makes some catches, and you go, okay, this looks more like, him doing things that they're asking him to do as a receiver, the more receiver type things. Receiver is running routes, understanding space, catching the foot. That's the thing. Like, you mentioned speed and size and all that. A lot of times we forget about catching the football as a receiver. Like, that's the most important aspect. When you're open, can you catch the football? Can you make contested catches? I think Nick worked really hard this offseason going out and catching a bunch of footballs to where he looks more comfortable there. Is he a finished product? No. Are there some catches he makes where you're still going, God, he's kind of fighting the ball a little bit? Yes, but has he improved there? I certainly think so. And you can just kind of see him getting more comfortable out there playing in space, blocking, yards after the catch. He had another catch in the Vandy game where he catches a quick out on the sideline, makes a guy miss, hits a guy, gets some extra yardage. He's trying to be more than just a guy who's, hey, he looks good, he's fast, he can go run a go route for you. And so there's a lot left to do to continue, like I said, to tap into that potential, which I think is still immense, and probably unfairly because he was ranked as a 5-star and because he does have world-class speed and the size kind of combination. A lot of people thought, okay, Nick Harbor, here we go. We're getting this kid in. He's going to catch 70 balls in year one. And despite everybody who had kind of followed the recruitment, Shane Beamer himself, trying to tamp that down a little bit, it did persist, to where people are going, what's going on? I think now people have, Gamecock Nation as a whole, they understand the progression now. But at the same time are really hoping for Nick to make that next step. And like you said, he's a good kid, hard worker, his own biggest critic, I would say, but also very confident. And so with extra practices, it's going to be very interesting, man. When you're talking about guys, hey, who could be a breakout player in 2025, armed with this information, knowing that he's going through an entire slate of spring, for me, I'm more willing to go forward and say, hey, this is really, I think, a guy to watch in the early part of spring and throughout the year to see how much farther he can go with his progression.
Yeah, man. Obviously, a guy who has the talent. We'll see what that looks like. Being able to work with someone like Mike Furry, I don't think you can downplay the importance of that either. Somebody that has coached in the NFL, played in the NFL at that position, and very clearly has made an impact on Nick already. So another year with him should be fascinating. I'm curious to see, did you take Beamer's answer about outdoor track? Like, it's just not official yet. Can't completely confirm it yet. Like,
yeah, I think, and let me say, I don't know for sure, so I don't have any inside info. I'm holding back here, but that was my impression. Just kind of knowing how coaches talk, how Beamer talks, how he thinks a little bit from covering him for a while. That was my impression. It's kind of like, I don't want to speak out of turn type of thing.
yeah.
But Nick's full focus could end up being on football. So we'll see. It's evident, Wes, how driven he is to me. Like, just listening to Nick and his comments on your show with him the other day. That's a guy that really wants to be, like, he doesn't want to just take the next step. Like, he wants to be, great. He wants to be great. And so I think he just recognizes, hey, like, and this happens, by the way, I mean, maybe Nick does pick track back up, and there are some people who do, and he may be one of them ultimately, who excels at multiple sports in college. But it is hard, It's very hard, especially given, what are the two sports, what are the positions that you play. And for him, just, I think he recognizes with that learning curve and what he has to continue to do, it is a lot and needs to pour his full focus into football for now, at least.
Well, and he wants to be a kickoff returner too, Chris.
Yes, making your dream come true. Non-gadget play kickoff returner. Just regular, just let's get a straight regular kickoff return.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a shot to be the guy, I think. Now, that was one thing, I guess, Darren Usher talked to us about on our GC Live after signing day was, hey, like, almost all these high school wide receivers have experience being return guys. So they're going to have some options, but that position is going to be wide open as well. And if, hey, Nick's been out there, he's been involved on kickoff returns, why not at some point let him get a shot at actually returning the thing? Have been for that for a long time. Still think he would have to be the biggest kickoff returner in college football history. But, man, that would be a pretty fun sight, I feel like, for everybody to see. Let's see, before we turn it over into recruiting, was there anything else that Beamer said on Saturday? So he introduced the team, introduced the newcomers. Once again, staggering, Chris, the new normal for the number of newcomers that you have in a given season when you add up the fact that you have so many transfers, but then almost your entire high school class, and I think the number is 20, actually going on 21 now, in terms of high school guys who are enrolled at South Carolina.
Huge class. And you're right, man. It is the new normal. last year, to my recollection, rather, small group that enrolled in the summer. Remember, there were 4 or 5? It was like Mike Smith, Jalewis Solomon, a few guys here and there. This year, same deal. The vast majority of your class, because if you take a big transfer class in the December window, almost all the time, those guys are going to be ready to go and ready to enroll in January. And same thing with the high school class. It's become so common for guys to enroll early. It's becoming I wouldn't say common, Wes, but you're seeing guys now, forego a whole year. I mean, heck, Jordan Gidron, I don't know how many times, if he plays next year, this will be mentioned, a zillion per game. But, this is a guy that not only reclassified and is getting out of high school year early, he did that plus enrolled early. So kudos to him for getting all that academic work done. But yeah, just a big group.
Year and a half early if you're counting at home.
Year and a half early, which is nuts. And so yeah, it's another really big class. Heard some good returns from folks who were at the basketball game that got to interact with a bunch of those players that were out there. Heard from some folks that got to interact with the players that they were impressed by the group just in how they conducted themselves. The freshmen, the transfers. So seems to be a good group. And the cool news, Wes, is we'll get to see a lot of those guys in spring practice. So we don't have to wait till preseason to kind of get some early returns behind the scenes and in person with what we get to see. And then, of course, get to see them in the spring game, which that was another piece of news. Officially, spring game on Friday, April 18th. So that is Easter weekend. It is the Heritage down in Hilton Head weekend. Heard some complaints about that. Beamer noted the same thing. But it is on a Friday night. So you can do the spring game Friday night. If you want to go down the Heritage over the weekend, cool. And then, of course, you get Easter Sunday. But line of thinking there is you match it up with the transfer portal. Also, the portal is going to open the spring portal window on April 16th. And so that way the staff can kind of basically have spring wrapped up. There'll be a couple of days of overlap. So that'll be the spring game, April 18th, Friday this year.
Has there been a Friday spring game before?
There was some discussion at one point. This is bad, man. I actually don't remember.
Y'all correct. Somebody will correct us. I promise you that.
Oh yeah. Gamecock fans that are more on top of it than we are right now.
I'm just trying to figure out, did we memory hole it, or has there really not been one? Yeah. Somebody correct us if there hasn't been. But yeah, this will be, or if there has been, this will be a little bit different for sure than it has been, at least in recent memory. The other big football news, actually not that new anymore as fast as kind of the news cycles go these days. But since we've had a show, Chris, Beamer's extension on Friday. And I think we probably knew that was coming. You kind of figured he'd get something, but now is a $8 million man. And this is the reality of college athletics, college sports. You're either firing your coaches or you're extending your coaches. And as Beamer said when he was asked, hey, do you like these way too early top 25s and way too early top 10 lists? Well, it beats being on a hot list, basically, where people are saying your seat is warm. I don't feel like there was a lot of those last year, but there were a few where people wanted to be maybe a little bit aggressive in going ahead and putting him on a hot seat list, but certainly none of those now. And Chris, a example of South Carolina, I think just doing what you do in terms of continuing to reward your coaches when they're successful. We saw that with the assistant coaches almost immediately. This might be, frankly, and this is a compliment. This is as aggressive, I think, as I've seen a South Carolina administration be in terms of just taking care of their coaches, especially the assistants, in terms of getting it done quickly.
Yeah, we have come a long way from, remember early Spurrier years, hey, this assistant's leaving because he's going to get a multi-year deal somewhere, which South Carolina wouldn't do at the time, or he's going to get a raise. You don't really hear of guys leaving South Carolina. Not that it's never happened, not that it never will happen. but just straight up, money, or they wouldn't give me the type of contract that was needed. There's been a shift in that, and so if you have a staff that you want to keep, you want to do what it takes in order to lock them down. And Wes, the question that we all had in the NIL and with revenue sharing potentially probably around the corner, will the coaching salaries slow down, taper off? They haven't so far. Beamer's new contract, $8.15 million for year one, which is this year on the contract, and then escalating $100,000 annually each year until 2030. That's a big contract, yes. Yet, it's 10th in the SEC, right? Brent Venables, I think, is $2,000 a year or so ahead of Shane Beamer, at least for 2025. So, still kind of middle of the pack in the SEC. It just illustrates that, big contract, a far cry from Beamer's first contract, which was $2.75 million, which was actually a very small contract at that time, relatively. Doesn't sound small to probably everybody here on the show, unless you happen to make $3 million a year at your job. Congratulations. But nonetheless, at that time, pretty small. Beamer's worked himself up to, with the success that he's had, to that mark. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, man, South Carolina rewarding their coaches. Dawn Staley just got a new contract. Assistants just got a new contract. And of course, there will be an expectation of continued success with that contract too.
Yeah, no doubt. Get paid more money. People are going to ask for more from you, and
that's right.
That's just how it works. So we'll see if South Carolina can keep the momentum going this offseason. They did keep some momentum going on the recruiting trail, I would say, this weekend, a junior day event. This has actually ended up being, I would say, officially their first junior day of this offseason. The first one that was planned was because of, the snow and ice and all that got kind of pushed back or canceled, however you want to say it. So they had one this Saturday. That involved being over there at the Ops building. That involved being able to take in the men's basketball game if prospects wanted to. And, Chris, a good mix of what I would say are still emerging prospects. This is the time of year. It's way too early to put too much stock in. If you see 3 stars by a guy's name, does that mean he's an average prospect? Maybe, but a lot of times you still see guys who are early targets who will move up on the rankings, or maybe they don't even have a ranking by their name yet, but they start getting major SEC, ACC, big-time interest, start moving up these lists. But then at the same time, some guys who already are incredibly highly recruited and highly ranked. One of them, a guy who I would say is up there with about anybody South Carolina's after in terms of priority targets, Chris. Rodney Dunham from North Carolina, Charlotte area, Myers Park. Is this officially our Sterling Lucas watch, where Lucas always has Carolina battling with the big boys for at least one elite edge prospect per cycle?
Yeah, I would say he's got his teeth sunk into probably a couple this cycle, but Dunham would qualify. And, man, everything you hear about Rodney Dunham, before this visit, during, after, just really makes you think that this guy's a big priority for the staff. And he's from North Carolina. He plays a premium position. He's being recruited by the guy that's been probably arguably South Carolina's most effective recruiter with what he's been able to do on the trail. 2-sport athlete, also plays baseball, considering doing that at the next level too, but really talented and a lot of upside on the football field and being pursued by a lot of the nation's top programs also. So looks like South Carolina's in it. Haven't been a lot of returns, if any, from Dunham himself after the visit, but you hate to do it. It's kind of become a little bit of a joke or a punchline, Wes. Like, do you ever hear of a visit that doesn't go well? Yeah, you do actually sometimes. And I think the returns from the Dunham visit were positive. I don't think he's close to a decision, but Carolina's in this one. And this is exactly the type of scenario, exactly the type of event that you want to get him in for. And you talk about this a lot, Wes, kind of the I'm going to steal it from you. I'll let you expand on it, but kind of just like your progression of recruiting these prospects. You want to get them in for a game, a camp. You want them to work out. Dylan Stewart, when he had tons of offers, was out there working at camp with Sterling Lucas. You want to get him in for a junior day event that's more, laid back, but also goes into some depth of what life would be like as a Gamecock student athlete. And, I think this was one of those visits for Rodney Dunham.
Yeah, and you like I said, you look at that position. Sterling Lucas does just a great job of getting those guys on campus, which is the first step in all of this. And edge is such. That's one of the spots, in my opinion. Yes, you can go get guys out of the portal there, but I think much better off building up that spot by high school recruiting, and Dunham already way up there, man. Number 19 overall prospect in the country, according to On3's rankings. 24/7 has him 9th overall in the country. On3 industry ranking, number 26. And under all those rankings, he's the number 3 edge prospect. So a guy that you can certainly see why South Carolina is after him, and why they have prioritized him. And I was going to say, I like the joke that on the Insiders Forum of, hey, when has a visit ever gone badly? Well, I will push back on the concept there a little bit, because there's been quite a few times where a guy has visited and we've said, yeah, the visit went well, went fine, went good, but we don't expect this guy to end up at South Carolina. So I would say, like, that does happen. Generally, it's more official visit time, and if it's a transfer guy, it's maybe some things don't match up to what a guy's looking for, or if it's an official visit in the high school ranks in the summer, you just hear, hey, they had a good time, but it didn't really seem like this is where they're going to end up. So yeah, you don't ever hear about a guy having a terrible visit. That just really doesn't happen very often at all. But you do have visits where you will hear, hey, this is not happening. Like, this is not a match on either side. And sometimes it's the school saying, I mean, we've had that. We've had official visitor. We said, well, hey, Carolina's actually not pursuing this guy anymore.
Yeah. And one difference is, like, it's just the nature of it. If you hear some things, we'll report if we hear, South Carolina's not going to pursue him. We're not going to write normally, Wes, a headline, Wes Mitchell has terrible visit to Columbia, with quotes from the kids saying it was terrible. Like, that doesn't really make any sense for any reason, to do that. And those are few and far in between. The match part is much more, sometimes you hear of guys that it just doesn't work out for whatever reason, or the staff doesn't pursue, or the prospect doesn't vibe with it as much. Sometimes guys have wonderful official visits and great relationships with the staff and still don't pick South Carolina. That happens a lot. There's some guys they had on campus this past weekend that they're way down the road with, that they've got a great shot to land, that they may not land. Doesn't mean those guys had bad times at South Carolina, that they hate the Gamecocks. Just means they pick another school. And you want to get more of those guys than you miss on, for sure.
Yeah, so there's some guys that I don't want to say all their recruitments are going to end up the same way in terms of final destination, but some guys that I feel like do fit a little bit of a trend right now, and that is in-state prospect. South Carolina gets in on incredibly early, and now their recruitments just kind of blow up from there. You look at, for example, Contavian Polo Anderson, who is at Dorman, the safety there. South Carolina in on him very, very early. Other schools have come in and really prioritized him down the stretch here lately, including Clemson, with him being an upstate guy. That was an offer for him that frankly matters. So to get him back on campus, which he did visit, it went well. You look at Tamarian Watkins from Northwestern. He's blown up, I would say, as much as any prospect in the state of South Carolina over the last couple of months. Georgia offering, Texas A&M offering, Alabama offering for Carolina to get him back on campus. I I'm trying to confirm, Chris, maybe you know, I need to find out if Desmond Green made it in because he was on our list of expected visitors, offensive line target. Similarly, Carolina in on him early. You know, you've got a former Gamecock coach there as well. You've got a guy that typically Carolina under Shane Beamer, and especially on the offensive line with Lonnie Teasley and that crew, they've been able to get in on these guys early and win these in-state battles for offensive line targets. But Georgia, a major factor with Desmond Green here down the stretch. So keep saying down the stretch. We're really not down the stretch yet.
Well, Desmond Green's been recruited for like 3 years, it seems like. So, and he did make it in Saturday, by the way.
He did. Okay, so what I'm trying to say, good for South Carolina to get all those guys in at this time because other schools are trying to sort of chip away in a lot of those cases, and maybe they've had some success, particularly with Green, chip away at those leads. And, you know, I think for them, these early relationships have been massive in these previous classes. We'll see if that can continue with this class, with this group. Jalen McGill, a running back that we know is a South Carolina target, not in this past weekend, but is now committed to Rutgers. Now, does that stick? Does he stay committed there? We'll see. I tend to think this is a example of something we've talked about in a more general sense, and that is if a school says, hey, we want you to be our number one overall target for a class, we're going to treat you like that. With the portal and NIL and all these different things, the talent does get spread out a little bit more. People may be saying, how, or why, or when? Rutgers? What? Well, if Rutgers says you're just our top guy, we're going to treat you like that, then maybe there's something to be said for talent getting spread out a little bit more. I tend to think, A, not over by any means, not over by a long shot, but B, that's a little bit of what you have going on right there.
Yeah, and speaking of running backs, which there was a time where McGill and South Carolina really looked like there was some traction between those sides, right? And it kind of, I was actually thinking in the lead up to the Rutgers decision, Wes, I was like, man, I don't know if you got this impression. You're like, you don't hear quite as much lately about Jalen McGill. And then that happens. Probably not over, and not just from South Carolina. I mean, other schools, right? I mean, Clemson was in on him. A bunch of schools are in on this, Tennessee, North Carolina, et cetera. But the Gamecocks did have a guy who's been also a long-time target at running back in this weekend, and that was Carson Baker from Hughes in Fairburn, Georgia. He's a guy, Wes, that's been on campus several times in several different settings, whether it's a junior day type of event or a game. Marquell Blackwell, South Carolina's running backs coach, has been after him pretty hard for a while now, too. I mean, this is a guy that has, again, big competition, Auburn, Georgia, et cetera. The typical group of schools you would see for a guy like Carson Baker, talented running back out of Georgia, 4-star, can really run. He was on campus, too, and gave it nice reviews. So it's another target that's a long-time target, not to be redundant, but another guy's been a long-time target of the staff who was on campus Saturday as well.
By the way, South Carolina visiting Samari Matthews today, according to a tweet from Samari, 4-star defensive back, one of the best corners in the entire country. Another guy South Carolina has been in on for a long time and has really, I think, focused in on as a primary target for Torian Gray in that group at that position for this class. So all this to say, we are starting to get a feel, like we've been following this 2026 class for some time, but you're starting to get a feel for, like, these guys are on the clock now. Like, this is the class you're focused on. These are now your rising juniors. They're starting to set official visits. They're starting to get ready to kind of lock in on their favorites, or in some cases, go ahead and make commitments. So with that, our attention and our coverage turns a little bit more in earnest towards following that too. Lynn says, how do you feel about guys who keep shopping after a commitment? You know, it's a good question, Lynn. I will say far more important than how I feel or how Chris feels how does South Carolina feel about that? And as we've seen, it depends. Now, I think there are maybe right ways to go about it, wrong ways to go about it. But, in the case of a recent recruit committed to South Carolina for some time, but South Carolina basically essentially said, we don't feel like you're committed, so we're not going to consider you committed anymore.
Yeah, it is a case-by-case basis, and there's more than one player actually in this class, in the 2026 class, that has been committed to South Carolina that's continued fielding interest from other schools. And when I say fielding, there's different levels to that, right? There's nothing to stop other coaches from offering your committed prospects coming by the school and visiting, unless you just tell them absolutely do not come. But a lot of prospects, especially in the year 2025, you don't always want to do that, right? I mean, there's the transfer portal, there's the coaching carousel, there's relationships. And for these guys, they get recruited once. If you've already committed in the 2026 class, you committed pretty early, and some of them do want to continue going through certain aspects of it. I think it all depends on the how, the why, the behind the scenes. If you are, if you're getting information, if you're South Carolina, that really indicates a guy's not all that solid, that you're just kind of a placeholder, a reservation, so to speak. Yeah, maybe you want to move on. Maybe you have a conversation about it, about shutting it down. And if it persists, then you move on in another direction. You've also got, you can figure out the other side of it too. If it's just guys having conversations, maybe even taking visits, going somewhere with a teammate, that's a different ball game. And, Keenan Britt, Peyton Dyer, a linebacker and a defensive back who are committed to South Carolina, they've continued picking up offers from other schools. I think they've communicated with some other schools, but South Carolina had both on campus this past weekend, and the returns seem pretty good. It seems like South Carolina's comfortable with that, to where they feel like those guys aren't shopping. Are they maybe keeping lines of communication open, keeping relationships going? In some instances, maybe. So I just think there's levels to it, and I agree with you, Wes. You just gotta. It's up to the South Carolina staff to kind of decide what they are comfortable with.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Everything's going to be a little bit different, as we know. There's no science to recruiting anyway. It's all art, and everybody has their own way of doing things. So we'll see what comes of all those situations moving forward. Hit on a couple other guys, then we're going to get on out of here. A little bit of an abbreviated show today, but Chris, Ryan Mosley, 4-star wide receiver / athlete, little bit of a South Carolina-Georgia battle brewing there. Gordon Sellers, 4-star wide receiver from North Carolina. He was in town with his family, had a good time as well. Both guys, ball indications, had a good time. You and I both spoke to Mosley, and I was kind of curious to see. So early on, we knew Donovan Murph, Jordan Gidron. Those were like the 2026 targets that we knew for sure, strong mutual interest. Well, what happens? They reclass. They signed with South Carolina. Now they're coming in for 2025. I was very curious to see, what does that mean for 2026? Like, who are they still involved with? Who's at the top of the board? How many 26s do you even feel like you have to take? I think it does allow you, and I'm not speaking for Furry when I say this. I'm just giving my opinion. It does allow you to be a little bit more selective if you want to be, in terms of how many and who you would take for this 2026 class, because you've taken so many kids in that class prior. However, I would still be, if I'm them, I'm going to still be pretty aggressive in trying to just stack talent.
Yeah, I mean, you look across the country at the best wide receiver rooms, and you can go, okay, there's some really good freshmen, there's some really good juniors, senior. They have them in every class. And Mike Furry's been pretty upfront about what he wants to do with the room, and I think he's made some strides in that, Wes. The thing I'm pretty confident in, to your point about class size and number of priorities, I don't think that South Carolina is going to take a 6-man high school class this year, because they just took one. They may go get a portal receiver in the spring. You figure, maybe 2026 class, you may go take, who knows, a portal guy or two. That's a long way away, actually. But they are going to hone in, be selective on, it really seems like a couple, for the purposes of this class. Like if they could get 2 really good ones, that's not to say they'd be done. But if they could get, for example, a Ryan Mosley and a Gordon Sellers, I think they would be very, very happy with that. And those are 2 guys, again, they fit that bill. Really good relationships with the staff. I think very comfortable on campus. Mosley from Georgia, Sellers from North Carolina. Georgia involved with both. I think it's primarily South Carolina, Georgia for Mosley. Sellers has a top 5. Georgia's in it. North Carolina, Clemson, one other school that is evading me right now, and the Gamecocks. And so, Carolina might not get either. They might get one. They could get both. And we'll just have to see how it plays out. Both of those guys could possibly decide this summer. We'll see. But the Gamecocks are certainly in the mix there.
Yeah, no doubt, man. And Mosley actually also told me he has not set a date yet, but he does plan to take an official visit to South Carolina. That will probably be in June right now is his plan. So you're starting to see guys set these OVs and sort of, I guess, map out their plans. Brian Harris, a defensive lineman out of Jacksonville, Florida, already is looking to be back on campus. Somebody asked about D-line earlier. Maybe you got to keep an eye on. He is a Maryland commitment. South Carolina recently offered. Had a fantastic visit. I got the feeling, for one, probably one of the most just outgoing kids I've ever talked to about a visit. But 2, just really seemed like South Carolina caught his attention on that trip. So if they, which again, they just offered him, they have offered him. If they prioritize him and go after him, I think someone in South Carolina can have a pretty good shot of landing, even though he is currently committed to Maryland. So lots going on there. He'll be back for that spring game that we talked about earlier on April 18th. So, all right, y'all, I think that's it for today. Chris, you got any closing thoughts, man?
No, man, that sounds good for today.
All right, well, we will be back here soon, hopefully to talk a little bit more ball, a little bit more recruiting, and everything in between. For Chris Clark, I am Wes Mitchell. Once again, shout out to our guy, Clint Hammond, CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797. Y'all have a good one. We'll see you soon.